All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for joining. We'll go ahead and get started. We are very thankful that you're able to join us today for our webinar on how New Orleans 911 agency quickly scaled their COVID-19 pandemic response. I'm your host, Ankit Shah. I am part of the product marketing team here at QuickBase, and I'm joined by one of our customers, Tyrell Morris, Executive Director of Orleans Parish Communications District. Before I get started, a bit of background about Tyrell. So before joining the Orleans Parish Communications District, short for OPCD, Tyrell had more than 15 years of success leading operations within high-profile and diverse public, private, as well as nonprofit organizations. During that time, he led large-scale operations to ensure standards of excellence and business continuity. Mr. Morris is also highly accomplished in emergency and crisis management with expertise in leading business-wide projects that really make a big impact. After becoming executive director of OPCD, Mr. Morris recognized an opportunity to challenge his staff to consistently seek ways to be their best selves during each and every shift, and so developed this acronym called SHOW UP. We'll talk a bit about that later during our chat. But the development of Show Up and the buy-in from OPCD staff has been a key factor in enabling OPCD to provide the citizens of New Orleans with top-notch emergency as well as non-emergency services when they need them the most. Welcome, Tyrell. Thank you so much for being available.
Thank you very much for having me today.
Absolutely. I know we're all scrambling to ensure our employees are safe and healthy and that we can continue to move our businesses and communities forward in this phase of disruption, but we really appreciate you doing this.
Absolutely.
Great. Before we kick this off, a couple of housekeeping announcements. We'll certainly be doing our audience Q&A, so please submit your questions at any point during our Q&A section. Note that the chat option has been turned off, so if you have any specific questions, please do enter that into our Q&A section, and we'll get to as many as we can. With that, let's get started. So Tyrell, we would love to give you, we'd love to have you kind of give a quick background about your role, your responsibilities, and potentially a typical day-to-day. I know day-to-day is kind of hard to talk about, but what does a typical day-to-day look like for you and your team?
Absolutely. So here at OPCD, we are the gateway to city government. No matter what type of services you are looking to receive, either it's public safety services or non-emergency services, we are that gateway. And quite honestly, my team has taken this as an opportunity to redefine what efficient and effective government looks like. It does require us to think outside the box. The traditional ways of doing business no longer meet the needs of our people that we serve. And so we have to be very intentional as far as how we are going about that work. As far as day-to-day is concerned, it is a 24-hour operation. You can imagine 911 is our top priority of things we answer here.
Yeah.
We have 180 employees here. It's funny because when people think when they call 911, they only really interact with one person, and they think that it's just that one person managing their emergency. I have asked people that come visit us, stop calling us a call center. Yeah. Because answering the phone call is a small part of what we do here. And if you look at the real estate on the operations floor, only 20% of my space is answering the phone call. The rest of it is managing the emergency. A lot of people don't realize that when you call 911, not only is the call taker processing your call and ascertaining the information, but there's usually a dispatcher in that separate part of the room that's making a decision, making a decision of what resources to send, what kind of resources to send. So it is definitely an incident management decision and function of the overall public safety structure. As far as a day in the life or what my day looks like, right now in COVID right now, I get to work about 8 o'clock and my team briefs me in the morning, kind of gets me prepared for my day. And then by 10 o'clock, I do a briefing for the mayor. We talk about data that we're seeing. We're following this pandemic very, very closely, even up to the hour. We only saw, double digit, around 25 new cases in the last 24 hours, which is a major difference when we start seeing 500 new cases a day when this pandemic started And so we absolutely are flattening the curve. We have done so, but now we are just letting the data make those decisions for us, or using the data to make decisions on when we bring the city back to our new normal.
That's interesting that you talk about sort of what the day-to-day looks like, but it obviously has to ladder up to something big, right? Because you want to make sure that everybody's kind of marching towards the same speed and drum. I'd love to talk, if you could share with the audience a bit more about your agency's mission. I know when we were talking briefly, you had talked about a very simple mission that was easily understood by not only externally, but also internally. So can you share a bit about that?
Absolutely. So our mission here on paper is very simple. And my goal was that every person that works for this organization could articulate what that mission is and also identify what it means, what that mission means. So our mission is to get the right people to the right place at the right time, better than anyone else in the world. And the mission has kind of morphed. When I became executive director, the mission was just the beginning part of that when I first started. But as we went down this journey of reimagining what this organization was, it kind of stopped us at once we executed the mission. You called 911, we got you the help you needed, but they didn't talk about quality. And that's where we added that better than anyone else in the world clause to the mission per se, to kind of always push us to seek opportunities to better ourselves or execute our mission even better. And I will tell you, in the public safety arena, the threat changes daily. The dynamics of the threat change, the work changes daily. If you were to ask me a year ago that if a pandemic hit, that my agency would be the one that was managing a self-quarantine registry, that my agency would be the one that was routing these emergency requests for food service. So this pandemic has taught us that government has to be in a position to change very rapidly, be very flexible, be very secure, but also be very intentional about meeting people where they are and meeting their needs.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how simple that mission is, because it helps translate into, based on that mission, how are we going to define goals and execute on that mission? And you said it in such a simple way that it makes a lot of sense, not only for the local government, but also those that are serving that government, right? How do you think about your goals, your priorities, and sort of, I think some of the ways in which you mentioned you are measuring the effectiveness is through KPIs. Can you share a bit about how your team's specific goals and priorities are?
Yeah, so one of the things that I have shared with my leadership team is that every decision that we make has to be connected to the mission. Even the decisions of what we put inside the vending machines. The person making that decision has to relate that to the mission of the organization, or how does that decision help us execute that particular mission?
Yeah.
But when we talk about key performance indicators, we talk about not just how fast we answer the phone,
yeah,
but how do we qualify the service that has been provided? Did the caller, because people are calling us potentially in the worst day of their life. Our job is to bring resolution to that crisis, no matter how large or small that emergency may be. And how well did we do that? We measure many parts of the process: how fast we answer the phone, how compliant were we to the protocol, what was the call taker's inflection in their voice, did the dispatcher select the right resources, did we go the extra step to make sure that all of the needs were met, even the ones that are unidentified by the caller or by the citizen. You may call me for one thing to say, hey, my neighbor's grass is too high. Okay, well, let's ask a different question. When's the last time you've seen your neighbor?
Yeah.
Well, I haven't seen my neighbor in a couple of weeks. So let's make sure everyone's okay in the house. And so it's our job to dig deeper to make sure that the holistic needs are met of the citizen. It's interesting because we have this idea of 911 and 311. 311 is for non-emergencies, but you will be amazed at how many people call 311, and by our definition, they are experiencing an emergency, but they feel like they are a burden, or in this crisis right now, they don't want to overwhelm the system. But when they call 311, and when they start talking about what they're reporting, it is indeed an emergency. And so one of the beautiful things about here at OPC is that our staff are cross-trained. All of our 301 staff are also trained as 911 operators. So in the event that happens, they can still execute the mission. They don't have to transfer anybody. They are well-versed. They understand how the system is connected, and they're able to provide that service.
That's so interesting because I think, as you think about executing on that, it's great to define goals, priorities, and all of that, and you start executing on those. And, obviously you run up against challenges that either you're like, yo, okay, I'm going to plan and know kind of these are the things that I need to think through. But, just to get the audience a better understanding of like execute on something as important as this mission is, what kind of challenges and roadblocks do your teams face? And, how do you ensure that you can execute on those goals?
Well, I think we have to be very honest about the conditions that we work in. My staff, when they come to work every day, they kind of turn off their own problems, whatever they may be going through. And for those 12 hours, they bring on the weight of the world. It's one emergency after the other. We do program some breaks in there to kind of give them that mental break. But when you disconnect that call, once the unit, the first responder gets on scene, the call taker's on to the next call.
Yeah.
But those field units are probably maybe tied up for a couple of hours sometimes. And so we have to be very honest about the conditions that they work in. And we have to surround them with resources. One of the things that I tell my staff all the time is that you'll never hear me tell you, leave your personal problems at home. If I invite you into this environment and I expect you to turn off your feelings, you're going to sound like a robot. You're going to provide robot-like service.
Yeah.
And so we have worked really, really hard to create an environment where it is okay to feel. It is okay to be honest about how you're feeling. It's okay to be honest when you're struggling. It's okay, and the agency can be seen as a resource as opposed to well, I don't want to share a place of vulnerability in life because, I may be seen as weak. No, I want you to show me you in its rawest form, so I can build you up to be the professional, even when you're dealing with all that other stuff that mucks up the waters. Because when the call comes in, the citizen, quite honestly, is not thinking about what you're going through. All they know is this is the worst day of my life, and I need you to show up and get me the help that I need. They don't care who comes, as long as it's someone that can come and that can help them.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, there's the human element to everything we do, right? And as part of that human element, you got to figure out, well, I need the right kind of tools. Like, yes, I'm coming from an environment into another environment that is going to be extremely challenging. How do I ensure I have the right tools to give the best to those that are calling in their worst days? Can you share a bit about what kind of tools do you and the team have access to help them go through their day?
Well, yeah, absolutely. So one, I would say they had to feel supported by leadership. An example would be this morning, we had an incident where an officer was shot. And, I walk into the center, I immediately get a pulse of the organization. And I will tell you, although things were moving, there was an overall sense of calm. And that is only because the staff felt as though that they knew what to do. They had very clear instruction. And they knew that if they needed something, they had plenty of leaders in the room that could turn to provide them that support and assistance. To me, you can't get any better than that. We do offer, as far as our mental health support is concerned, we do offer a partnership with a nonprofit. I don't claim to be a mental health professional. I try not to be. And so when the staff disclose they're having some difficulties, my job is to match you up with the resource. And so the agency has entered into a partnership with a nonprofit to provide those services. We have staff come to the center to check on people even after a major incident. But we also find that through our Show Up campaign, staff are beginning to self-regulate each other, where they'll bring to management's attention, hey, we believe that someone may be having an issue, or I heard through the grapevine, or I saw they posted something on social media that's giving me the indication that something is going on. That gives management the ability to just, I call it, do a pulse check. Do a pulse check. And, we talk about how do we lead. When people ask you, what's your leadership style? My particular leadership style is people first, employees second. Even if the conversation is disciplinary in nature, or if it's compliant piece in nature, we still can have a conversation focused as a person, as opposed to you being the employee. Even during separation conversations, when we have to make the decision that this person is no longer an organizational fit for us, and those are very difficult conversations, but they can still be delivered with humility. They still can be delivered with empathy. And that's a balance. One of the things I will tell you that I find difficult in this particular role is that governmental leaders, you meet very phenomenal leaders, but where they kind of fall short is it takes a lot of stamina to maintain that consistency of support 24 hours a day. And I think once we understand that that's what our leaders need, they'll have that longevity. I was talking to someone last night about the tenure of a really effective 911 director in a big major city. They don't last very long, only because, not they're not unwilling, they're phenomenal leaders, but it takes an incredible amount of stamina to make that happen on a consistent basis.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's so important to ensure that you're providing the right kind of, health tools to ensure that your employees, continue to feel safe, secure, and have the confidence to hit the goals. From given that you're in an environment that's constantly changing, like, there is no playbook, right, where we know this is how it's going to be, right? Times are, with the kind of responses that you have to meet, it's constantly changing. So how do you provide, because of the processes that you have that may be constantly changing, how do you ensure your teams have access to the right tools from a, hey, this is my process, this is how you do it, but the situation has changed. How do I adapt to a process like that? Or this is my workflow, this is how I do it. Well, given the situation that it's constantly changing, how do I adapt to something like that? Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I think it's twofold. One is communication. For example, I was telling the staff for a long time as this COVID thing unfolded is that I would be the one to deliver the messages when the situation unfolded. So they knew they had, because we got so much of misinformation. We have TV screens all over the center. They're getting on their phones or on the devices. There's no way for them to really filter what is reliable versus what is not. And once we established that the office of the executive director would be the communicator internally of reliable information, that brought some people calm. And so when they got a correspondence to my office, they knew they could trust it. Also, I committed that in the event that we had an employee here test positive, that I would be the one to deliver that message. And once that happened, I followed suit and said, I'm the one that told everybody that this happened. I also laid out what the risks were, what the exposure risks were, and what instruments we're putting in place to protect everybody. So not just protect them, but also protect the integrity of the mission. Secondly, it requires, our technology has to be flexible. Gone are the days of legacy systems that cannot be easily adapted. And I mean easily adapted, I mean within hours. I'm sure many people heard that in December, the city of New Orleans came under a cyber attack. And we had to really pivot as far as how 311 moved in that environment. And I will tell you, we were the only agency unaffected by the cyber attack. Not a single system in this organization was impacted by that because we had taken very strong cybersecurity positions. We had played this scenario out, and at the end of the day, 911 and 311 would continue to work with some level of familiarity from the citizens' perspective, but also from our staff's perspectives. That exercise or that incident prepared us for this COVID-19 scenario. And so when the requests came in from many different organizations to be the keeper of the information, the staff were very familiar with the technology platforms we were using, and we made the technology platforms pivot and mold to our needs as opposed to moving the people. And we were very clear in our information. We communicated consistently and often. And we also realized that it's okay to remind people. Sometimes, in this world, we say, hey, the policy is written, you should read and understand it. Okay, this policy is written for everything.
Yeah, that's right.
Even when how to clock in to get to work. I mean, there's policies written for everything. And so we have since changed the culture to say, it's okay to provide a reminder. I don't need everyone to remember everything all the time. You should have some familiarity in that, but if it's something that you don't do on a regular basis, it needs to be okay for management to provide a friendly reminder on how people should operate. We've got to get out of the idea that people are intentionally not doing things right.
Yeah.
And we have to just trust that we hired good people, and let's give them the tools they need to be good people, the people that we hired them to be. Now, yes, every organization has some bad actors, but we have as well, even during this crisis. But once we all had a strong mission of where we were going, the bad actors began to weed themselves out, and not by me, but by their peers. They began to really self-regulate and identify individuals that were not being helpful to the overall mission of the organization and the city.
Got it. How does, so when you talk about systems, can you talk about, again, given the fact that things are constantly changing with the systems that you have, the core systems that you have in place, how do you ensure that your teams have the right information at the right time so they can service those that are in need? Can you talk a bit about, from a systems perspective, how do you, what is your typical stack, or, and a stack is a very technical term, but what does that ecosystem look like for you?
So here in our organization, as you can imagine, our systems have significant reliance on their availability. So there's a lot of other systems, a lot of people relying on our systems to be working 100% of the time. And so from a leadership perspective, we have to be very honest about what that looks like. And what I think government has maybe gone wrong is we do not embrace the culture of early adopters. We do not embrace the culture of being on the bleeding edge. And I think we have to be a little more risky to be more adaptable, to be more flexible. We're not going to achieve this level of flexibility by keeping these antiquated ideas of what technology should look like in the governmental spectrum. Yes, cybersecurity is real. The concern is real, but it is manageable. And I think we recently have demonstrated that when we came under attack and we were able to leave it or defend it off. We have to make it okay to be innovative. And I know a lot of governmental units say, hey, we have innovation units, but what we're finding is by the time you acquire the technology, by the time you go through the bureaucratic process, the technology is obsolete. And so we have to find mechanisms to move those new solutions that seem like really, really great ideas into an environment that we can maximize their benefits faster. Government has to begin to look at the successes of the private industry and find out how those successes can be realized in our environment. Bureaucracy is going to kill us if we do not find ways to speed it up. And as the workforce enters government every day, or a younger workforce enters government every day, this group of individuals, they know nothing else but being on the bleeding edge. And so if we do not adopt to that level of thinking, then we're going to have a cataclysmic clash once things happen. I also think that we have had to make a strong stance in how we accept cloud-based technology. It took a long time for any government entity to say, I'm okay with my data being hosted somewhere other than in my server room. And that hurt us. That hurt us in the cybersecurity incident we had in December. So those systems that are relying on public safety, we are making a decision to move those to a cloud-based solution. But it doesn't just move the data; it transfers the liability. Honestly, New Orleans, any cyber incident you have in your government is going to be expensive. Yeah. Yes, it's going to be, you have insurance to cover some of that, but it does not, you never recoup all of the cost, either hard cost or opportunity cost. And for us, turning over the data into someone's hands where their primary responsibility is security, where their livelihood, their reputation is on the line, if something happens, it transfers the liability financially. If something does happen, we're finding it's really good balance for us, and we're having some significant success in that arena.
Yeah. From a systems perspective, and I think when you say we're looking, certainly having a good mix and be comfortable with where the industry is headed, certainly looking at cloud-based systems. Like one of the things that you talked about earlier was having, a tool within your tool set. And I think one of the things that you mentioned there was really how low-code platforms are enabling you to deliver value to your community, right? Can you talk a bit about, why did you look into a low-code solution to help with some of the challenges that you just articulated?
Absolutely. I think when we started down this QuickBase venture, it kind of sold itself to us, because we started with just 20 users, and the only function we had for QuickBase at the time was to just manage vacation requests. That was it was supposed to be a staffing module for us to kind of see, kind of forecast the needs from a human resources perspective. And then, so we started with one button on the dashboard, and then we ended up with 30. If we realized, okay, wait a minute, we got to break this up into different types of applications. When OPCD took over the 311 operation in last year, January of last year, we knew we had to ramp up a solution that could handle that volume of data, because the legacy system, it just was no longer a fit, and I was not willing to bring over a broken system into a highly compliance-driven environment. So we built the entire QuickBase application on 311 application on QuickBase. So if you go to our website, NOLA311.org, it looks very pretty, but all the back end is QuickBase. All the data is managed in QuickBase. The mobile application side is all in QuickBase. We were able to shrink our removal of abandoned vehicles from 90 days to probably 6 days, because we developed a paperless workflow to the Department of Public Works to go out, do an inspection, take a picture of it, and then, hey, go back in 5 days, it's still here, hit a button, it notifies the tow truck to come pick it up, and it's gone. And so we have kind of revolutionized the flow of information. Again, our goal is to redefine what efficient and effective government looks like. Once we begin to learn more and more about the platform, it became obvious that this was the tool to be, we call the data lake, where we're going to store all this data, address data, all kinds of stuff, and then all those other systems that we have will point to this single piece of data to gather information. An example being, we have an application in QuickBase called constituent accounts. So anytime that someone has an interaction with the New Orleans City Council, they have an interaction with 311, they have an interaction with many of the applications we built, it's pointing to this single place to get this account information. Now, I have one place that I can go look to say, hey, I look at this household, I have a holistic approach of how this person is interacting with government on many different levels. So when I go to service them, I can meet all the needs of that house.
Got it. So you have sort of the central visibility, you have the right level of transparency that you need to ensure that you're able to pull in the right data, whether it's within within a local platform like QuickBase or any of your existing core systems. So you're set up really, really well, right? And then what happens, right? A few weeks ago, COVID-19 hits, right? It turns in from an epidemic to a pandemic, global crisis. And with all of that, you have to ensure there's continuity, right, of operations within your local government. So can you share a bit about, what did this crisis mean for your team, right? And, you've got your challenges that you hadn't even, like you've got your challenges pre-COVID, right? And then you have new sets of challenges that your teams are facing. How can you share some of those new challenges that your teams faced with this new disruption?
Yeah, I will say one is, our 301 call volume increased by 350%. And I will say, using our already existing infrastructure in QuickBase, we quickly, within a matter of minutes, expanded that out to accept more of this COVID-related requests. And once we have the data in the lake, I call it, we can then inform the external agencies that we service how to move those resources. For an example, people who are home under self-quarantine that could not go to the grocery store, they can make a request to us to say, hey, I do need some meal deliveries because I live alone and I can't go get food and I can't have it delivered, or whatever the case may be, so I need to be fed. We were able to quickly develop a heat map through an interface with Power BI by zip code and really present to the mayor and the cabinet saying, hey, from the entire city, here are the hot spots that we've identified that need meals. And then literally the next day, we made it happen. So data really informs decisions, and it's one thing to have a system that has the data that you can't use, or you need to have a doctorate degree in coding to extrapolate what this data means.
Yeah.
That was not our environment. My undergraduate degree is in theater. I ain't touch a computer. So, and most of the applications in QuickBase, I built them myself. And so it just speaks to how easy it is to quickly develop and ramp up.
Yeah.
I mean, hot meals is just one example. The mayor gave an order to close non-essential businesses. And so instead of flooding our 911 lines, we told people to call 311. We put the information in the system and it routes it to the appropriate agency to handle, or illegal evictions. And based upon the GIS data that's in the background, it routes it to the appropriate office to send a constable out to go enforce the no eviction laws. And so we really have demonstrated value that with the right tools, government can and will be efficient and effective. Go figure.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's interesting because you speak to the background that you and the teams have, being able to access, as long as sort of they're technically, have that mindset, you can really come in and build the right kind of applications that you would need. And in terms of how long it takes, I think you just mentioned it's not, you have to respond within hours and days, not weeks, right?
Let me
So
give
it's
you an
really
example.
good. Yeah.
So in October, the Hard Rock Hotel on October
Right.
12th collapsed in downtown
Yeah.
New Orleans. It was under construction, and we had a pretty extensive search and rescue operation. The fire chief called me and says, hey, I need to track some way for my units that are going in and out of the hot zone. And so within a matter of 30 minutes, we call it evac tracker in QuickBase, where we had one control point. We had a mobile application. When you walked in to go into the hot zone, the person checked you in. So we knew here at any given time how many people were in the hot zone. In the event we had another collapse or another emergency, we knew how many people we were looking for. The worst thing is for having an emergency, you don't really know how many people you started with, so you don't really have an end game in sight. And then when they check out, they click a button, it dates, time stamps it, and we know they're out of the area. And so we stood that application up within 30 minutes of the request coming in from the fire department.
Wow, that's huge, right? Because being, speed to value is so important for an agency, that being able to respond so quickly is paramount. So that's amazing. So what I kind of want to talk about the impact, right? Because you're really, we're talking about the human element here, right? So if you think about the, if I were to think about what the real impact is, it's huge. But I'd love to have you kind of share, what does this solution mean to you in terms of what kind of impact does this have for the city? Can you talk a bit about that?
Well, I think the impact is the city, the people who we serve, they really feel that government is in the trenches with them. Give an example. So we've asked people who are home on self-quarantine that have symptoms to call us and report they self-quarantine. And what happens is every 48 hours, a member of our staff will call those individuals to make sure they have what they need, to monitor their symptoms if they're getting worse, to maybe send them an ambulance, or to track if they're getting better. And once they've recovered, they tell us, hey, I've recovered, I'm good, stop calling me, we move on. So we're able to really articulate to the leadership who are responsible for divvying out resources where our people need us the most. And I think that has had a phenomenal impact. The citizens feel that we are boots on the ground with them, and they really enjoy that touch. I can't speak to another example in my career where government has been that in tune with the needs of the people on the ground.
That's amazing. Got it. Okay. So, I think that is super helpful. What I would love to kind of talk about is, I think with the current state, it's such a powerful story. What I'd love to switch gears into is, given this is a really powerful story, and the work that you and your teams are doing, just to ensure that the community is safe and, you can move your agency forward. So really thank you, Tyrell. This is really, really important. So thank you so much for being with us on this. We'll quickly switch into Q&A, but before we do, I just want to talk a bit about, much like the story that you just heard, just to address the audience, right? Much like the story you just heard, companies, agencies, companies, organizations are facing ongoing challenges in the light of this disruption, right? And it really far outpaces their ability to be agile and to respond quickly to the needs of their employees as well as their customers, right? They're struggling to establish new processes, gain better visibility into that, and really trying to solve with manual processes or, like Tyrell mentioned, legacy core systems just doesn't work it, right? It's too slow, too, or too inflexible and limited in scope and scale, right? So I think it's important to recognize that, in the coming weeks and months, you're going to be needing to create fast and agile solutions so you can really adapt to continue to be flexible and to stay ahead of or immediately react to changing circumstances in how you manage your operations or ensure your team stay connected, safe, and productive, right? So if you would love to get more information on how QuickBase can help you with that, to improve speed, agility, and transparency by making it easy to continuously adapt your operations for changing workflows and new data needs, please go to quickbase.com/business-continuity. With that, I would love to switch and transition into Q&A. So I know we had a bunch of questions come in, Tyrell. There was one in particular about, there was this question about the demands coming in from COVID, right? So one of the questions is, what new demands has COVID-19 made on your operations? And what are you doing differently to respond to those?
Absolutely. So yes, I mentioned earlier that our 311 call volume increased by 350%. We are seeing from a public safety side that our incidents are going down, and primarily because people are heeding our warnings and staying at home. And so, we adapt by, one, we made sure the public understood to only call 911 for life-threatening emergencies and do everything else for 311. And we also gave them the expectation that you are going to wait. There's going to be a little bit of a hold time, or visit our website for faster service. And I will say we've been able to answer these questions or handle these requests in an acceptable time period. So that's how we're handling the change in workflow or workload. Gotcha.
There was another question here about change management, because anytime you try to implement these things, change management is huge. So can you talk a bit about what does change management look like in terms of how do you implement updates, rollout, be it to the applications throughout the agency?
Yeah, and so we do this, we communicate differently to different people. I will say internally from a staff perspective, when our first application to just manage the vacation request, the staff fell in love with it. And then every time we added a new feature, they loved it. And then they started calling QuickBase their daddy. I'll put it in QuickBase. And I give an example. Now I see there's some other questions here about other interfaces. Yes, our applications in my eyes are not very complex, but they do interface with many other different systems. For example, if you go to data.nolo.gov, it's an open data portal where you see many pieces of data from city government. One of those is 311 data. All that reports in real time to that public-facing interface. The other piece is mass notifications. So example, today this morning we had an officer that was shot. That requires a significant amount of people to notify. We used to do all those notifications by hand, calling one person at a time, which some of these notification lists have 20-some people on it. We build an application, and then as soon as the triggers are entered into the system, it does a robocall and calls all 20 people at one time. And it gives them all the information by text message and by voice of the stuff they need to know to start responding to the emergency. So those are some of the things that we are interfacing with. There's some other questions I see here about what other cloud-based technology are we using. We are transitioning all of our records management from public safety agencies to the cloud. We use Power BI. And so we're shifting all of our critical infrastructure core services to the cloud.
Got it. Great. There was another question in here about how, in terms of the applications that you're using, which seems to be a little bit more internal facing within QuickBase or within your agency, do you expose QuickBase to the community to make them, use QuickBase to kind of, help with either data collection or reporting, anything like that?
Yes, we have had a couple applications where they use everyone on the internet role. Before we had the 311 website, to submit a ticket, the citizens would literally go to QuickBase through a URL, and they could add a ticket as long as you had an internet connection. You couldn't manage it, but you could at least dump data into the system and let it do its thing. But now that we have the website, through an API, it just dumps the data, the records into QuickBase. I have a couple other applications I've built for some other people where they do use that quite a bit. So we have used it in the past, and if the need comes up again, we would have no issue using it again.
Great, awesome. There's a question in here about complexity of the QuickBase applications that you're building. So, do you interface with other well-known applications? Do you know any, do you do any kind of custom integration, things like that? Can you share a bit about that?
Yeah, so right now I mentioned we have an integration with our mass alerting platform that happens through the technology, or the method is called email ingestion, where QuickBase sends a data message by email to this address, and then the notification will then break that up and send out text messages or robocalls to whoever is on a predefined list. We are working some integrations right now with our 911 CAD system to do some data analytics on top of the public safety data that we have. And so those are just a couple. We do have a tie into QuickBase to our financial management system, so I can run some high-level executive dashboards as far as the financial health of the organization. And so, yeah, we have a couple, and we explore these integrations all the time. It's almost a minimum requirement. Any new piece of technology that we procure today, one of the minimum specs is it must have open API. So even our HR system, our time and attendance system, when we acquired those, we did require them to have open APIs so QuickBase could communicate with it to and from.
Got it. There's a follow-up question, which is somebody else's question, but it's a good follow-up question. When you do spin up these new applications, how do you balance getting the app built quickly versus making it connect to other systems? Do you consider any of that, or is that, of course, typically just depends on what the requirements are?
Well, as far as the ability to integrate between multiple systems?
Yeah, so the question is more around, do you focus more on the speed to get the application out and then worry about, well, all the other systems I need to integrate with, or you think through all of that first before you get the application out?
It depends on why we're building the app. If we're building the app because the hotel just fell down, then I needed to do some basic things. But I know that the data is in this one place that I can go get to later on. Now, if it's an application that we are building and developing, for example, 311, we had 2 whole months to develop that. That was not, we could have did it in a week, but we wanted to make sure we got it right. And so we really took our time to make sure that we executed and we planned it very well.
Yeah.
But I can't, the next time I give it out or ask to make an application, then it's going to depend on why I'm making it. I do see a question here, asking me a question about a robocall.
Yeah.
What that is pretty much, there's an automated, pretty much Siri voice that calls your phone, and they read verbally the text from QuickBase as if I'm calling you to tell you this incident has just occurred. That's what we mean by robocall, and it does do it very, very well.
Awesome. There's a really good question here around who else within the city government, like do any other branches of city government have access to your QuickBase systems, or is it only the OPCD that's using it?
So we're using the data now. We're up to 400 users, and so any agency that is serviced by 311, meaning we take requests for your particular agency, then we do offer user accounts to those people to go in and manage the data. Now I do know there's some other city agencies, like for example, the New Orleans City Council also uses QuickBase to manage all of their constituent engagements to log all of their interactions with the citizenry. And as far as the involvement from my IT team, my particular IT team does not support QuickBase at all. Yeah. They submit tickets directly to QuickBase if they run into a particular issue. That's
great. Yeah, I think it's interesting how we've seen with our customer base, where, depending on the scale that they're in, there is IT involvement, there is IT, IT is blessed, they want a business, they want to enable business to drive innovation, or in this case, the agency to drive innovation, right? So, as long as obviously IT has visibility and, it can help set it up, I think, it seems like that's a good, and we've seen with customers, like in your case, you kind of driven from, within your department versus IT driving this. And we have customers where it's driven from IT, right? So there's a good spectrum of this collaboration between business and IT. So that's really, really exciting. Okay, I think those are most of the questions. I think if we didn't get to your question, it was probably a little too specific, and we'll certainly follow up with you on that. I think one thing that I have seen in the questions is certainly wanting to learn more about the website. So Tyrell, if you could do a quick plug of the website that you talked about, I think that would be super helpful for the audience.
Sure. So NOLA311.org is our 311 website, and you can kind of see how the data moves in the background. Again, when you go on and you submit a request, it just through an API dumps that information into QuickBase where the data is then managed.
Got it. Awesome. All right, guys. I think this has been very, very, very helpful. Tyrell, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. And for those that, are able to attend this, please reach out if you have any questions. You can certainly find more information about QuickBase if you go to quickbase.com/business-continuity. All right, with that, we will end this webinar. Tyrell, thank you once again. This was fun.
All right, thank you all.
Appreciate it. Have a good one.